Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of the Focus Stack podcast. And as we get started here, I just want to go through some of that YouTube housekeeping stuff. If you are watching on YouTube or Spotify, make sure you subscribe. We're also on Apple Podcasts as of a couple of weeks ago. So you can find the podcast there. The video podcasts are both on YouTube and on Spotify. And also, if you want to follow the podcast on Instagram, I will be posting some shorts and updates on different episodes so you can keep up to date on the types of shows that are coming up. And then also, if you are a photographer and you would like to be a guest on the show, there is a sign-up form on the description for the podcast, both on Instagram and on YouTube and the other sources as well. Just fill out that form with a link to your portfolio, and then I'll be in touch and we can set up a time for you to be on the show. So with all of that out of the way, I'm really excited to welcome photographer Michael Lichter to the show. Michael is a motorcycle culture photographer and got a long professional career as a professional photographer. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me on, Jim.
Yeah, so one of the things we always start out with is just kind of talking about how you got into photography. But what I'd like to do is throw your website up here so people can kind of get a sense of what type of work you make as you say that. So you add that to the show. There we go.
Well, it's so interesting how different photographers came into photography. And listening to Jen Magnuson's podcast that you did and Rick Suter's, Jen having had a different career path, and she started much later in life, and Rick having a photographer for a mother. For me, it was very different. I think I considered myself creative as a kid. I don't think I ever thought of myself, but I was attracted to creative things. I did go to a summer camp once. It was an utter failure in the traditional summer camp sense. And then after that, went to art camps, which suited me much better. And that's actually where I pretty much started photography. I was in the darkroom at 5 years old with an uncle and absolutely fell in love with it right then. And then again, when I went away, I was 13, 14 years old. I was had a room of 4 guys above a darkroom, and I spent a lot of that summer in the darkroom and taking pictures. And then within a few months, I had a darkroom built of some used gear in the laundry room in the basement. And so that went on for many years. I graduated high school a little bit early, and I went to live on a photo farm called Pyron Workshops in Millerton, New York. And there were a dozen people. I was the kid on the block. Some of them were doing it for college credit or after college. So I was the young kid that they dragged around. There were only a dozen of us. There were 24/7 darkrooms were open. There were no classes. It was all just work with other people. We did critiques. That's all we did. And then from there, I'd actually thought about going to Brooks and considered it pretty seriously, which would have given me a very different career path. Pyron was much more art-oriented, and Brooks more commercial. But when I found out you had to cut your hair, and I had hair down to my way down below my shoulders at the time, I said, that's crazy. Not that
Wait. So Brooks had told you had to cut your hair?
Yes. So,
wow.
Yeah. And so I thought, any place that would demand something like that, I mean, I wouldn't have even minded cutting my hair. It became an issue that if that's how conservative they were, that they were making an issue of something like that, then I had no interest. And so I pulled the plug on that, ended up at a Pyron, and then ended up in college in Colorado. I came from New York, ended up in Boulder, Colorado, went to CU, and ended up in the art department. We really, without planning, it was just things happened. I started doing photography, but I did portfolio into the upper level, like the graduate level, senior level classes. So again, there was no teaching. It was all once a week critiques where you just get together and talk. And so that's my background with photography, getting into it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really interesting. So you went to an art camp really young. Huh? It was really cool.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we did ceramics. I made cabinets in the wood shop, pottery, all sorts. I mean, it had everything: painting studios, dance, theater. it was not that far from New York. So it was sort of a summer stock type place where a lot of professionals got their summers off, and
Uh-huh.
they'd head up to the hills there.
Oh, that sounds really cool. So how did you transition your interest in photography into motorcycles?
Well, first it was I was still photographing for myself, and this was the around 1977, 78. I was shooting rodeos and kind of whatever I wanted. I'd done a lot of travel. I'd traveled in Asia as well and hitchhiked all through Europe and kind of hand to mouth, that kind of stuff for quite some time. Taking pictures, and a lot of people would say, like, oh, you need to go to some foreign culture to photograph. And so I started photographing around here, things that interested me. But it was, again, cultural based. I just enjoyed traveling around. I'd hitchhike for a while. I jumped trains. I kind of any mode of transportation. And then a friend of mine loaned me a bike, and I'd been on bikes younger, but it wasn't part of my upbringing. I mean, I certainly rode on friends' bikes, and they loaned them to you. You'd run through the mountain, through trails and mini bikes, things like that. And then a friend let me try his bike, and it happened to be a 1947 Harley Davidson Knucklehead chopper with 20-inch over long front end. I just fell in love with it instantly, and not long after, I had a small Honda 450. And about a year later, I got my Harley. But I was always photographing from the bike and attracted to going to events where where other bikers were. And so I started photographing that. And then things started coming together when a housemate who was a journalist saw some photos. Happened to be of Cheyenne Frontier Days, and said, "Hey, can I use them for something I want to write?" And then a few weeks later, he hands me Westward magazine. It was the cover of Westward. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And that was my first commercial endeavor. And then he asked about a couple more things. And I think I had about 4 covers in Westward before the 5th time when they gave me the back cover. I thought, well, what's wrong? How come it didn't make cover? And I didn't realize how hard it was. And then similarly with motorcycles, I sent some pictures at request. I met somebody and said, hey, can you send some pictures in to Easy Riders magazine? I sent 10 black and white prints. This is 1979. And they printed 3 of them. I didn't think much of it, never sent anything else. And then I meet them, same person, about half a year, 3/4 later. I said, why did I stop? And they encouraged me to send some more pictures in. And so within months, I was doing assignments for them: Kansas, Nebraska, Utah, Wyoming, surrounding states. And then in 1981, and by then I was already doing a lot of smaller stuff, and I did Sturgis. They assigned me a week long in Sturgis. I had something in Calgary, Canada, and they started flying me places like Florida. And one thing led to the next. I should explain that through that, they said if I could shoot bikes. And of course, I had no training, so it was all self-taught. So first they said, can I do color? And I said, absolutely. So I started putting Kodachrome in the camera. And then they said, can I shoot bikes? And I said, sure. I started doing. And then they said, well, if I could shoot bikes in a studio, they'd use a lot more of my work. Did the math, and we built a pole barn in the backyard where I am right now, 43 years later. And still in it. I mean, it's been developed a lot. We've added a kitchen, bathroom, office, and it's grown quite a bit. But this became the nerve center, so it paid for that very quickly. And then other people said, hey, you have a studio. Can you shoot this? Next thing, I was shooting 4x5, and one thing led to the next.
So you started out shooting all 35, and then when you had the studio built, that's when you switched to a larger format?
I did get a medium format first. I didn't get the 4x5 until I had the studio and somebody had to shoot, and I borrowed somebody's 4x5. That's typically what I did for everything. I'd borrow something, see how it worked. They taught me how to load the film, stay up till 3 a.m, practicing loading holders and whatnot. And then they'd walk in at 9 a.m, and you'd start shooting.
Nice. So I assume you're shooting digital now. Are you still shooting film?
No, I shot film for right up until 2000. It is actually couple of years, I was president of ASMP Colorado for 3 years. So I used to get a lot of calls, and this is when things were going just early digital. Kodak had a $20,000 Nikon conversion digital, and it was very premature. Our phones do much more than that now. And I had it in my head that I said, by the millennium, I think it's going to be ready. And sure enough, December of 1999, that's when we got a very elaborate Studio Leaf camera system. Didn't go 35 for another year. I felt it wasn't there yet, but started with that. And I had clients like early on in the early 80s, like Kraft Foods was my biggest client. I did a lot of, I worked with IBM and storage tech, annual reports, and advertising, all sorts of stuff for different people. Exabyte was another computer company here. Storage tech, I did their annual reports as well. And one thing led to the next, kept going. Towards the end, I kind of pulled back from commercial work after 2008 and the economic crash. It was so competitive that I felt Oracle was my biggest client at the time, and they were a great client. I used to go to Europe and see my photos of their storage boxes, 3 or 4 stories tall on sides of buildings, and it was great. They were a great client. But then I kept that, but I just pulled back. I never showed a portfolio. I didn't try to get work. And then it was around 2011. I think the art director I worked with at Oracle left and gave me all the contact info I never even followed up on. I just let it go. And I just stayed with the clients that kept calling and my motorcycle work, which I did all along.
Yeah. And you do a lot of like fine artwork now with the motorcycle stuff, right?
So what you see on the website that you're looking at now is from the limited edition section. I do exhibit those. So I have a big show coming up this summer that I'm getting ready for. There'll be about 85 frame prints. So, and I do exhibit that. Now, I was exhibiting in the 70s right through 81. And then I was getting disillusioned with the art world. I had an exhibition in Dublin, Ireland, that got boycotted by the League of Decency, believe it or not. Can you imagine these people outside picketing with their signs?
Really?
Picketing my show.
Why is that? Can I ask
I was
details?
shooting at that time it was bikers and rodeos combined, cowboys and bikers. And there was some stuff where there was some nudity, from some of the motorcycle parties and things like that. Yeah. And they objected. So that's what happened. They moved it to the back room. It was still there, but they moved it in the back room.
Oh, wow.
So, and after that, then that was the last show I did for 20 years. I got disillusioned with how commercial the art world was. And so that's when I focused on my commercial work and kept doing the motorcycle work with magazines and whatnot. Just kept going all through it. And then I started showing again in 2000.
Okay. Oh, great. Well, we're here looking at the limited edition section of your portfolio right now. Is there anywhere any images you'd like to take a look at?
I think if you go to, let's start. I think there's one that says the 70s, right?
Yeah. Yep. I'll go to that. Yeah.
Since that's some of the older work that's on there, there's not much. And part of the problem is that a lot of my work, or I should say the majority of my work, is still in filing cabinets at Easy Riders magazine.
Oh, okay.
Been there for 40 years. The 20 years of film is basically there. And they've invited me to come out and start going through and pulling what I want. I just have to get out to California to do that. And that's going to be definitely a week-long project just to pull things out.
Yeah, so they just have it in like flat files there?
Yeah, they're in 4-drawer filing cabinets.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about slides, negatives.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Contact sheets, whatnot.
Okay.
So, I've pulled some things out over the years. So these are some things I happen to have. If you click on any of these, you can see, some of the earlier stuff. If you advance through to, there's a shot there that I mentioned. Now, some of these are from City Park in Sturgis in 1979. And that's when I rode my bike up. I was really on my own and just shooting. I had one camera, 35 millimeter lens, and, just kind of doing stuff on my own. And this is the stuff when somebody said, why don't you send some of these to Easy Riders? This is what I would have sent with these images. And there's one here with a prosthetic leg leaning against.
There it is.
Yeah. So like this photo of the prosthetic leg with the guy in a sleeping bag, right? He's not even in a sleeping bag. He's rolled in a moving blanket.
Mm-hmm.
And I was camped a little bit to the right. And it was early Saturday morning. The sun was just coming up. I hadn't slept. Basically the party goes all night, gets quiet probably about 4 a.m. And I just got up and started walking around with my camera. And being filmed back then and you're on your own, I have 2 frames of this whole set right there, that situation. And I was a few feet apart, 1 frame and then a second. And this was the better frame. And that's how things were when you shot film, especially when you shot it for yourself, right? You're very cautious. The funny part about this is this image has become quite known. And after I started exhibiting it in 2000, that was the first time I showed it. And there was a museum in Rapid City called the Journey Museum. Wonderful, beautiful museum. Yeah, so somebody comes up to me on the street in Sturgis and said, "Hey, do you recognize me?" And I'm normally very good at recognizing people that I've photographed before, but in this case, no recollection. And then he bends down, lifts his pant leg, and I see a peg leg, and I said, "Early morning," and he said, "Yep, that's me." Mm-hmm. So that was over 20 years after the fact, and we've since become friends. He's come out and visited from Kentucky, and his name's Ed Reiman. And it's kind of neat because I've had postcards that I've done a number of images. I give them out freely when I'm traveling. People say, "Do you have a card?" That's what I give. And one of those cards is this image. And so I've given Ed a stack of these and he gives them out. And I was at one event where I was a judge and I was up on stage. They were interviewing me. And I said, "Gee, I want to bring somebody up." And it was Ed. He was in the audience there. And people gave him such an applause. So it's kind of neat that he has become recognized through this, which I find really fun. And I love that story.
Yeah, actually, you gave me one of these postcards when we met the first time at the Colorado Photographic Art Center.
There you go.
And yeah, I remember you handed me 2. I took one for the school and one for me, and I had this one because it was actually, that's the year I was born. So cool. I thought that was cool.
So. Very cool. Let's back up and look at a couple other black and whites there.
Yeah, it's still in the 70s?
Yeah, just stay there for a minute. I think I'd call that Choppers on Junction in Maine. Yeah, I think one thing that's kind of cool, and it's just, people come up to me about my work. It's been out for a long time. And they say, "How did you do this? How'd you get there?" It's really, for younger photographers, it's hard because you got to start somewhere. But this is 79, before I was selling any motorcycle magazines. In August of 79. Now I'd started doing some commercial work and I'd done quite a bit for Westward. I mentioned at the time in some other magazines, but you got to start somewhere. And so this is early, but what's really cool is that to me, my photography of this culture represents the history of the US in the same time. It's 46 years now since that photo was taken. And, I'm coming up on 50, not too far off, it'd be half a century. But in many respects, it represents the history of the country through a microcosm, through a subculture. And then you look at things like this, and there's little things, whether it's the cars that are in the upper left, the style of the bikes, what people are wearing. That building was a barbershop for years, and Sturgis has changed so much. Everything's been sold and taken over by motorcycle enterprises. That one happens to be a t-shirt shop that built like a 3-story building with apartments on top for themselves. And it's all geared that way. And that old town feeling of Sturgis is not really there anymore. It's been changed so much. But I do think that's a wonderful thing about photography. If you keep going, it becomes historical. If you go to, let's go back to the 70s there. Let's see what we got. That next photo, the bobber at the bar and grill. It's funny because this was photographed again in 1979. I call it bobber at the bar and grill. Bobber is the style of motorcycle, but it's really what the World War II vets, when they came back from the war, these guys are fighter pilots. And I mean, they just had they weren't ready for a sedentary life, that probably suffering from PTSD and all this other stuff, that what are they going to do? And a lot of them turned to motorcycles. And then they'd strip the fenders off them on the weekend and they'd go race through a field. They called them field meets. And which is really, when you think of the movie The Wild Ones, which was based on an incident in Hollister, California. It actually was a photograph that appeared in Life magazine of a guy leaning back on a bike very similar to this. I think there was a beer bottle in his hand, and there were bottles all over beer bottles all over the ground. As it turns out, that was somewhat set up. Apparently, the photographer put extra bottles in there and kind of dramatized the situation. And that photograph was the basis of the movie The Wild Ones. It's amazing how things go back and forth. But this photograph to me represents sort of the end of that era. It's before Harley Davidson became so popular. It was a time when you'd pull up to a traffic light and the cars around you would all, if they had electric locks at that time, man, you heard all the locks go down, and it's just, Harley had a very different, anyone that rode a Harley at that time, it was very different. And this was the end of that period. Let's go back, if you can go to the 80s.
Yeah, let's go to the 80s. It's one of my favorite decades.
There you go. It's the one you remember, right?
That's my first one I remember, yeah. Okay, so this photo here?
Yeah, so I call this photo Faces. It was taken in, again, City Park again, where we had a few years. It was closed down after 1981, I believe. And this is 1980. And what's interesting is, if you think about it, this was photographed in August of 1980. And this is in the middle of the Iran hostage situation. So at the time, we were going through gas shortages, gas lines. People were pretty upset. And you could see there the one T-shirt that says Iran. What I like about it is I call it Faces because I just love looking at all the people in it and what they're looking at, right? And most of them are looking above me at something that's going on above me, and one guy's engaged with me. But again, as far as history goes, you think about when this was taken, it wasn't until January 20th of the following year that the hostages were released. You look at what people are wearing. You don't see a lot of T-shirts that are commercial T-shirts that you go out and buy. I don't think there's a Harley T-shirt in there. The one T-shirt you can read is somebody made it. They just went out and made the shirt to express how they were feeling. The kind of clothing, the jackets that they're wearing, the kind of bikes, it's all tied into history and when it was made. And I'm fascinated by that. And also what was on people's minds. It's kind of interesting that pretty much 30, 40 years later, we still have similar problems in the Middle East and people have similar feelings. But it was a more cohesive community at that time. I think part of it is it's grown so much. At this time, there were maybe 30,000 people in Sturgis, and it's grown to, there's been years that it's been 500,000. So how do you keep a community like that together? It's like any group, things kind of split up. And the way the country is so divided now, I think you could see that even in the motorcycle community, even though it is definitely a conservative bent.
I love the facial expressions, particularly with the people that are making eye contact with you. Yeah.
If we look at a couple other pictures from the 80s, we can go back. Yeah, this image for me stands out, especially I've done a number of podcasts, but they're always motorcycle oriented, not photography. And this one, I think, hits me as more photographic. I could talk about the photography of this more than some of the others. One thing that happens is people get so stuck in, I think because people are trained with cell phones, they point a cell phone and they say, look at this picture, or they'll look at one of my pictures and say, I have the same thing, but they're showing a picture of the same subject with total disregard to everything around it. And so this is something that I think as a photographer, whether you're trained or self-taught, you learn that this is not the real world. This is a two-dimensional plane that's a representation of the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, I think it really magnifies what goes on to the edges of the frame. And for years, I never cropped my photos. I started cropping, I think about 9 or 10 years ago. Once you start cropping, you never go back. But I think part of that is my eyes aren't as good as they used to be. But so everything was full frame.
And this is the edge of the negative that we're seeing around the
yes, I used to file my negative carries in the enlarger to reveal that edge. So in this case, I think the subject matter, the content, this woman, I call it "What's up?" Like she's looking at me saying, "What are you staring at? What's the big deal?" And her friend to her side, to her right or left, is like one of the happiest moments that you could ever see in a person. The joy that she is expressing there in that moment, and so I love when a photo captures a certain moment like that, where it's this so much expression going on, also gesturing and whatnot. And then everything, I didn't print this for 20 years, actually.
Oh, really?
I was interested in it, but there were a sequence of 5 images on the contact sheet. And it was this group of people, and there was this energy going on, which you, as a photographer, think of it as a sixth sense. You sense energy going on, and you go, what's there? And you're attracted to it, which is how I often operate. And so it was hard for me to make sense of it. Now, it seems so clear now in hindsight that this was the correct frame. But the others tend to focus, not necessarily focus, but made it too clear that the guy on the right that's looking at the woman, that he only has half of his left arm. And,
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And it's part of the photo, but it shouldn't be the subject of the photo.
Yeah.
And I relate this to the movie that Cher was in called Mask. And in that movie, her son, who's very, had a lot of problems and very disfigured and very uncomfortable with himself being out in the world. And then there's this biker club that comes in, she's friends with them. And basically they treat this kid like any other kid. It's just like, hey, stop feeling sorry for yourself, get out there and just do it. Right. And in a similar way, I thought the photos that showed the arm too much made it too much about that. Whereas this, it's part of the picture, but it isn't the picture. And that's how I say that everything has to be to the edges. I love the guy in the upper right. It's almost like Alfred Hitchcock, who always did a cameo in his film. Somewhere he put his head in there. And it's this guy and it's a stoner. He's like stoned out of his mind with the mirrored glasses, just dipping his head in. And everything leads you to the center.
Yeah, I love the way that there's this like frame of faces and guys around these two women.
Yeah, and again, it also about time. You see that, I think it says Hornblower or something on the guy's T-shirt. Somebody'd wear a T-shirt because their boss gave them one. It's where they work. But it wasn't like you went out and buy them. I remember when they started selling Harley T-shirts. It's like, why should I buy one? I mean, you should be giving it to me. If I'm advertising you, why should I pay you for this shirt, right? And that's how things were back then. Anyway, but I like this in terms of the two-dimensionality of this image.
Yeah, it's a great image. All right, so we're going to go to the 90s next. Do you click on that one?
Yeah, so I'm on stage. In this case, I'm on stage over bands, but this is supposedly a wet T-shirt contest. It looks like a lot more. And again, I oftentimes don't want to focus. There's probably hundreds of cameras pointed at that subject from the front. And to me, I think it's a better story to see what's behind the scenes. A lot of times I include the photographers in my photos, other people that are photographing something that's going on. But I call this drummer's view because in the 70s, when I was not yet professional photographer, I was working in a restaurant, I was in a jazz band, doing whatever I did. But I was a drummer for years, and I finally, unfortunately, gave up the drumming. I gave up the band because I just couldn't do both. So this was my homage to my drumming past. I call it drummer's view.
So you weren't drumming in this situation, though. You
I
were
was not.
shooting.
I was just
Yeah.
on stage. Yeah, I photographed so many bands. I think I could probably put a portfolio together as a band photographer of, arrows on stage with, I don't know, so many famous musicians, but it's not what I do. It's just part of what I do. It's, it's where you end up.
All right. So let's look at this image here. Maybe I'll shrink it down a little. There we go.
You know, at different times, because of my commercial work, I had access to, when I say access, I'd rent or eventually buy cameras that I felt would come in handy. But I used a 6x8 Fuji quite a bit. And it was in place. I had CNR cameras, 4x5s, a big system that I loved, absolutely loved. But then sometimes, and I had Mamiya 6.7, and then I also had this Fuji 6.8. I moved from the Mamiya to the Fuji for a while. And since I had it in the studio, I was using it quite a bit for my medium format work, and had bellows and acted like a 4x5. And this is before, I think there's something called a lens baby now, or other stuff. It's become popular. But at that time, and this was a big camera to go out walking around a campground with, you could imagine. But this particular frame, I call it Harley back piece. It was about the passion that people feel towards the brand. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I think it shows that. And it's funny because I did start exhibiting this around 2001, and this was only taken in 99. Harley actually bought 5, I think there were a limited edition of 50. At that time, I was doing larger editions. Now I'm doing more like 20. But at that time, it was 50. And Harley bought, I think it was 6 of them, actually. And they bought it for all their VPs. Willie G. Davidson was kind of the figurehead of Harley. He would go out. He was grandson of the founder, and he was head of design. So he was a very important character. But he was one of the VPs that got the image, and he hung it in his office. And it's kind of funny. I got a call from South America from a journalist one day who located me, and he was just being nice. He called me, and this is before we had our cheap ways of calling long distance overseas. But and he said, he'd just done an extensive interview with Willie G, and he was in his office. And he said, after the interview, he was all done, shut down, and he was leaving. And then Willie stopped him right by the door. And he said, hold on a minute, I want you to look at this. And he pointed to this image that was framed, I think it was, 16 by 24 or 20 by 30, framed on the wall. And he said, this is why he's there, and this is why he has a job, and this is what Harley Davidson's all about. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and this is probably the highest dedication to the brand you could demonstrate.
Yeah.
That camera with the bellows does. That's cool. It's doing that sort of like tilt shift sort of effect.
Yeah, so I was using a tilt on this so that the bottom and top were soft. You're focused on the tattoo, basically.
Yeah.
But then other things come in, like strangely enough, a bike in the background is sharp, right?
Yeah. Great image.
The next photo is also one that was with the 6x8. I've done, so like I said, I had access to these cameras. I said, I'm shooting mostly 35. And I thought, gee, maybe I'll just do some portraits and take it out and see how it works. This was after an event. I ended up at a friend's mother's house with him. My friend's name was Crud. He was on the right side there. He's the president of the Sons of Silence out of Denver. And he unfortunately since passed. But I thought it was interesting. What is it called? They're Crud, Gary, and their mom, Mary, in Clarinda, Iowa. And sometimes I think of this as the jailer and the biker, because his brother worked at the prison. And it was kind of interesting. He was still in his uniform. He had just gotten off of work, and we were meeting up at his mother's house. And just there's something I love about it. The mother is so proud, and these 2 sons from such different looks and whatnot.
Yeah, that's fun. And they both have their arm around her too, like kind of like Crisscross,
Yeah.
it looks like. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
So again, part of my experimentation, and they'd become serious. I was out with the Holga as well, in the spirit of trying things out just to see how they'd look, right? That which is, I think, a big part of why I take pictures. I take a photograph to see how it will look as a photograph, and I spend a lot of time looking at my own. But then in that same spirit, for a while I took a Holga out with me. I call this one Bike Across the Plains. But there's something about it that reminds me of Stonehenge. Something ancient about it with the shape of the shadow and the plains. And of course, that's the interstate underneath us there. And I love the glistening look. I've always been attracted to the West ever since I came out from New York. I've loved it. Robert Adams was a inspiration to me. I had been familiar with his work. He did a solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art when I was 14 years old. And we were members of the museum. So we would get these catalogs, maybe 4 a year or something. And one of them was the Robert Adams catalog to go with the exhibition. And I still remember seeing those photos as a 14-year-old, you'd think. And there were photos of the Denver suburbs and all the surrounding area that I had no idea I would end up in a few years later. And I thought the work was beautiful. I loved what he did. And that look of the West, that bright sunshine that just doesn't, there's no escaping it, right? And what it does in black and white, especially. I blew this up. I think it was like 24 by 24 from a Holga. But so it's again part of that Holga series that I did. Most of it was of people, but a few things like this would pop in. You want to go to another decade?
Yeah, let's go to another decade. All right. So yeah, let's talk about this image here from the 2000s.
So I call this image Hold On, and it's very almost dreamy looking, isn't it? It's otherworldly looking. And what it was is it's a bar called Suck, Bang, and Blow. Suck, Bang, Blow in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And there's probably a couple thousand people at this place, but they had this room with a garage door. The garage door would open up, and it was open. Anybody that felt like doing a burnout, they go in there. And then the garage door closes. And I saw this guy go in. And then the next thing, as he's rolling the bike by, there's some spring breakers, I guess. These girls were there. And she's laughing. He's going, come on, hop on, hop on. So this girl jumps in his lap. And the great thing is I found out afterwards that she'd never been on a motorcycle of any kind before in her life. So this was her first experience on a bike. And it happened to be in this, like a garage, and it's closed and it just fills with smoke. But I love how, again, if you can have that moment, whether you want to call it a decisive moment or whatever it is, but a moment that captures the spirit of something, which I think this does. She is in, I think it's fear, excitement, joy, everything all wrapped up. And then she's like grabbing his butt because she's just clenched in, I think, from fear again, right?
And she's trying not to spill her beer, too, it looks like.
Exactly. And again, thinking about the edges, I always like, there's this figure that looks like a Norse, a Viking or something up in the upper left. And in the right, there's a piece of a motorcycle coming in. So it really doesn't tell you very much. I think it poses more questions than answers if you just look at it. But, a funny aside to this story is after I was done, I was late meeting some people for dinner. And I always, when people say, what time for dinner? I always say dark 30 because don't expect me to stop shooting when it's still light out, right?
Yeah.
And this one I was a little bit later because I was indoors. So I'm meeting a group of people, and they're in a crowded restaurant. And I'm walking through the restaurant, and people are looking at me for some reason. And then I find the table of 8 or whatever it was, and they welcome me in. They go, what happened to you? And I hadn't realized it. It was as if I was in blackface.
Oh,
I was covered, the rubber.
Yeah.
I was black, and I didn't even know it. And I was so rushed to get there. I didn't look at anything.
Was it a
And
nice place?
yeah, it was a decent place. I ended up going to the bathroom. I don't know how long I was in there trying to soap it off of my hands and my face. It was unbelievable. And then I found out that the car seat was black and it was in a rental car. I spent like $70 on cleaning fluids and whatnot before returning that car. I never did get charged anything for it, but it was terrible. There was rubber everywhere. The camera
Wow.
was, yeah, it was something
Wow.
else.
Now that's crazy that there's that much of it in the air that it actually is like
Well, in
cover,
a closed environment, even in an
Yeah.
open environment, you'll get covered. But this was,
Yeah.
I'd never done it again after that. It was the first time in the closed environment.
Gosh, think about how much you were breathing in too.
I don't like to think about that.
Yeah.
That's an interesting aside as well, as far as the hazards of photography, because for years I worked in the darkroom and I prided myself in being a master printer. And, but I used to do selenium toning. I'd have a gram scale that I'd measure my own dry chemicals.
Yeah.
Powdered chemicals to make a 2-bath developer, and selenium toning, and very mild, like just so critical to the point that just noticed a little bit, pull it out. But for years doing that with my hands in selenium. And people go, oh my God, you'd never, you don't even want to put gloved hands in selenium anymore. And to think I was just doing it with my skin. So anyway, the hazards.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're doing okay.
Yeah.
So we'll go back out here.
Sure.
All right. So we're still in the 2000s looking at this one here.
Yeah. So 2003, this is the time when motorcycling was going crazy. It was very popular on television. There was a show called The Biker Build-Off on Discovery Channel. The Tuttles with American choppers were coming about. So there was a 6, 7, 8 years even where motorcycle was exploding because of the television coverage. Indian Larry was a person that was featured on one of these biker build-offs, and I was scheduled to meet him and Paul Cox, the person in this photo, to me. But Indian Larry was late. Cell phones didn't work very well out in the ranches of South Dakota there. We were supposed to meet outside of town a little bit. Larry didn't show up. We later found out he blew up his motor and couldn't make it. So it got to the point where I said, Paul, sun's going down. I'd love to get some shots of you. Let's go. And we went off on this road and then turned north on this highway here. And that little mountain in the distance, or hill, is called Bear Butte. It's considered a very sacred place to Native Americans. It's a really wonderful spiritual place, and it just pops up in the middle of the plains there. It's really magical. And Paul worked with Larry, who died exactly a year later, August of the following year, falling off a bike while he was standing on it, doing his little Arab acrobatic thing. But bike surfing, they called it. But so Paul Cox worked with Larry. He in the same shop. He'd help Larry with different things, and he was a great leather worker. And so he made all of Larry's seats in particular. He was known for that leather work. He's gone on to become quite famous in his own right. He's well known for his custom knives that he makes for the most noted chefs in the world. He makes custom knives for. He makes custom bikes. He does his leather work. He is truly a Renaissance guy. He's a wonderful person. And but this is 22 years ago. And so here he is on this bike that he called the Berserker. And I'd never liked bikes. I shouldn't say never. I would look at them, but it was hard for me to like a bike that mixed mediums that I didn't think fit. Like wood on a bike just didn't work for me. Now, I have since seen some wood on bikes that I think are beautiful. So there are exceptions. And I've seen plenty of bikes covered in leather and they just didn't work. But this bike, it had all the right ingredients. It worked.
Yeah. It looks like a dragon.
It's so cool. But to me, I call it looking back because now I'm riding my motorcycle, which you could see the headlights on the right. And I'm holding my camera with my left hand low to the left. Right? Because I have my right hand on the throttle, so I can't let go of the throttle. Right. So doing that, and then Paul's looking back at me, which hence the title. But I consider it looking back in many other ways. So to me, Paul what's the attraction of motorcycles? Guys love bikes. And what's that all about? And a lot of it has to do with this tradition or heritage. You think of outlaws and bikers and just outcasts in many ways, right? Mm-hmm. And I look at this and I see a Viking. I see he's got all this brass on him and covered in leather and the leather vest and his bare arms and aggressively going down the highway there. And so I think it, in a way, looking back in time and tying us into other periods in time.
Mm-hmm. So, well, but also riding forward too.
And riding forward, yeah. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
So he did all the leather over the gas tank and everything like that.
Oh yeah, he did everything himself and made the bike.
Yeah, that's a beautiful bike.
There's one more photo in the 2000s. Let's look at a photo from Cuba.
Yeah.
So this photo was taken in Cuba, and the way I ended up there in 2009, I've made 2 trips around that time, but I'd wanted to go to Cuba for years. And, this is something that happens, hopefully it happens a lot, but, as little or as much as it happens, it's a wonderful treasure when it does. And that's when the phone rings. And I'm a person that I want to answer the phone. And I want to check my email. I want to check my text messages because I'm looking to see what something great may be proposed, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, with time and as people age, a lot of times people get jaded and they're a little more hesitant to open the mail and open these different things because there's bad news can come too, right? But I've had many occasions where the phone rings and somebody told me to do this early on, and it's a great trick. So when that phone rings and somebody calls, and it's Pirelli Metzler tires from Italy. He's got a great accent on the phone. They say, is this Michael Lichter? Yes. We have something you may be interested in. We have a project in Cuba that we thought you may be a good fit for. So immediately should say, can you hold on just a moment? Put the phone on hold, go to the door, put your hand up, close the door, and then go back to the phone, throbbing in pain, and then say, oh yeah, tell me about it. Not too eager. Right? Because I'm all eager.
Don't want them to think you're hungry.
So it'll slow me down just a little bit.
Yeah.
So what it was not a paid job. They said they'd cover all my expenses and get me to Cuba. And at that time, I had to fly through Toronto. It was quite illegal to go, $40,000 fine. So you go to Toronto, and then when you fly from there, you say, don't stamp your passport, whatnot. You got to be very careful.
Yeah.
So I was meeting a film crew that they had hired to photograph the Harlistas of Cuba. And they were donating tires to them. And this whole thing, it was a tie-in between Metzler tires and these Cuban Harlistas. And they thought it was the end of the project. And they thought, gee, it would be great to have some still photos. And I do get invited all the time to different things. I'm going to Bhutan next week. I was in Japan in December. I was in India in November. I typically go to Italy every November. I was in Italy last September. If I'm invited somewhere, it's like, why not? Right? Mm-hmm. What a great opportunity. So I'll get invited by promoters, or in this case, a company, because they think I could get them publicity. They know that I have connections, that this is how I make a living. Mm-hmm. So I'm invited, and I wanted to go to Cuba for years. I would have gone no matter what. Mm-hmm. So I did go. I had a few magazines lined up ahead of time, so I knew it was worth doing anyway. Mm-hmm. And came back. I got a number of limited editions out of it. And as it turns out, it was in 14 different magazines. I know this beautiful large format magazine in Japan did 22 pages on it. It really went. And then I got a call from Italy, and they said they changed their mind, that they have this calendar that they decided they would love to devote to this. And they ran I do multiple calendars, but this was the most beautiful calendar I ever did. It cost like $25 for me to ship it to somebody. It was giant and heavy, gorgeously printed in Germany.
Wow.
That's what it became. And back to this image. So again, I got quite a few images that I really loved, but I call this one dress up, because you got to remember that it's illegal to, I mean, Disney and Harley are both not available there. And
Yeah.
here's a key fob with the Harley on it, or his
Mm-hmm.
lanyard, and she's dressed up as Snow White, I guess. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
where does this stuff come from? And she's looking up to him with this pleading expression, like, Daddy, please help me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's putting the little, whether it's a hairband or a crown or whatever you want to call
Mm-hmm.
it, he's so delicately about to place it on her head. And so this young, gentle, soft-looking girl, and then the biker, with all his
Mm-hmm.
accoutrements, bending down, the biker dad to do it. There's another aside to this backstory that I find fascinating, is that this guy, Harley, they're only from the 50s. They're all old used bikes that they've kept going. There aren't that many, and they're very expensive. And this guy had a little Japanese bike, but he hung around with the Harleys that did ride the Harleys, and he really wanted one. And he had these accoutrements, the key fob and the lanyard and whatnot, and the patches.
Mm-hmm.
So the dress up went not only to her, but to him as well.
Yeah. So what's the motorcycle culture like in Cuba? I know that there's a car culture, but motorcycles too?
The motorcycle culture is very similar to the car culture, because they're all these old cars from the 50s, the old bikes
Yeah.
from the 50s, and they got to keep them going. If you go back
Mm-hmm.
into the 2000s, there's an image I could show you which demonstrates that. It's a pair of hands. So,
Pair of hands.
yes. This image also from Cuba, to me, tells the story of the Harleys a little better, in that it's just this guy's hands. And I believe his name was Sabrino. And it's a piece out of the bottom end of a panhead Harley Davidson. And so he's pulled it out, this gear, and it's probably been out half a dozen times since 1950. You can't buy a new one. Here, they would never think of it. They throw it away and you order a new one, you have one on your shelf. But there, they have to recondition every little part and remake it.
Wow.
And so that's what he was doing here. But I love, you look at the nails and his fingers, and so I call it working hands. I remember I had a show in Virginia once, and I was giving a talk, and somebody comes up to me and they just love this image, and they said how it reminded her of her brother that worked in the mines, and it's just sort of representative somebody that works with their hands and works hard.
Yeah, just the sheen of the oil and everything, and the way that the tips of the fingers are kind of calloused there.
Yeah.
Great.
You want to go to another decade?
I think we could do another decade real quick. All right, so this is the 2010s.
Yeah. So here we are in the 2010s now. And things are changing. It's been quite a few years I've been photographing motorcycles, and things change also, like cameras, digital and whatnot. And I never considered myself a sports photographer much, but I think digital has made that a little easier. This is a place where it's up in South Dakota, and this is a friend of mine named Billy Lane. He's quite known, famous in his own right. He's been on multiple Discovery Channel shows and has a huge following. We had done a book together. I'd photographed his very first bikes in magazines around 2001 and sort of picked him out. And he went on from there. I photographed many of his bikes and went on to become Builder of the Year and all sorts of stuff. Unfortunately, had some problems and ended up in prison for about 5 years. This is after he got out, maybe 3 years after he got out, and he started a series working with these old bikes. They're called board track racers, and they're called board track because originally they raced on wooden boards. Tracks were made of wood, and the tracks were 1 to 2 miles long.
Wow.
Made of wood and wide enough that you'd have 4 or 5 cars abreast that could be on this track. That's how much wood they used. And they did board track motorcycle racing. That's exactly what the bikes look like. And he's trying to revive this, not on the wood anymore. This was dirt that day. And what I love about this is Billy just went out. It was towards the end of the day. I asked him, "Hey, Billy, how about doing a few laps?" Because everybody was gone. And he looked so joyful The expression on his face was so in the moment. I think that's what I'm attracted to in life in general, in photography, is people being in the moment. They're so they're in tune with what they're doing and loving what they're doing, whether it's working, playing, riding, whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean,
And
he
so
looks like he's having so much fun.
he's so in his element, and it's as if nothing else exists, and it shouldn't, because you got to be in tune with things. By the way, there's no brakes on this bike.
Oh, really?
Board track racers had no brakes, and they go fast.
Oh,
They'll be going 80 miles, up to 80 miles an hour and more, and no brakes.
Wow.
So yeah, and he's having fun there. And if you very quickly, we could go to that one photo where I have a portrait of him actually taken in prison. Back up, it's up towards the top.
Yeah.
There, second row.
Yeah.
I look at the picture of him on the racetrack there and the joy that he felt, and to me, contrasted with this, I've actually exhibited these two images next to each other in a show, and the contrast there of I got permission from the warden. It was a prison in Florida, and I spent a couple days there with him. And he was in this shop that they let him do. He was doing this fundraiser, so they let him actually build a bike in prison. And so I was able to photograph him down there. But this one shot where, looking through the chain link, I think it says a lot about somebody that's been locked away for a few years, right?
Yeah.
And then contrast that with the other image, and I think it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's like here he's just like longing for the road, or to get back out there.
Yeah. So I call this image Lightning Strikes. And since it was taken in 2013, it's people have said, "Oh, did you have one of those triggers?" And I never even knew that stuff existed. Apparently, you can get a trigger that sets your camera off when the lightning goes off, which I didn't know about. But so the circumstances around this is a Kid Rock concert, and it's the night of my exhibition was about 100 feet away from where I'm taking this picture. And the exhibition was, it was called Ton Up. It was about cafe racers. I should mention that for 22 years, I curated an exhibition where I'd only show my work every 5 years on the big anniversary years. And I'd invite other artists. It was a 7,000 square foot gallery that they built for me in South Dakota that's only used once a year. And I had a themed exhibition. So this particular year, everybody said it would never work. How could you do a whole exhibition on bikes that are mostly metric bikes, not Harley Davidsons, to this crowd? It was one of the more successful ones. It became a beautiful coffee table book that was actually republished in German and another edition in French. So it actually did very well. But so every year I would have a big industry party that became quite an event. It'd be close to 600 people, which is not easy to get 600 industry people that are somewhere to come together, especially in a place like this spread out. And so the party was finished and the concert was going on. And I had developed this terrible cold. And it's even more complicated. My father had died 2 days before. And so I had actually flown back to Colorado for a few days. I had to set up the exhibit back and forth. He'd passed. I came up. I had this terrible cold. And I had two assistants with me because I do a lot of, I have a studio set up. I'm shooting bikes. It's a huge deal for 10 days, what I have going on. So one of my assistants has readily pointed out that she's right next to the stage because I've blown this up big and you could actually pick your stuff out. Where can you see a crowd like this lit with a flash? I mean, the opportunity is unbelievable. So there was a zip line tower that wasn't used and I climbed up in it and I knew I wasn't supposed to. And I was there for less than 2 minutes before a security guy grabbed me and like basically shoved me back down the ladder. And in that time, it was starting to rain. I took several frames. I got this frame and it was over. And then I remember saying to my assistants, I got to get out of here. and we had 2 vehicles. I said, you guys could stay, come, whatever you want to do. I got to get some tissues and get some medicine. So I stopped at a quick stop on the way home, right near the highway. I go in and looking around, I can't find what I'm looking for. I finally go to the guy. I said, don't you have any tissues? He said, oh, sorry, bud, we're all out. So I get back in I'm not in the bike at this point. I'm in a little SUV, gray SUV. And I go about a block away, which is how far the interstate was. And I'm just almost underneath the interstate, going under it, when lights come on and I'm surrounded. And there's, I think it was 11 cop cars. And over a loudspeaker, keep your hands on the wheel. It's like, and I'm on with my daughter. It's like, and like finally I said, Kira, I think I got to go. There's something going on here. And I take my hand off just to hang up the phone, right? Because it was on speaker. And immediately, get your hand back on the steering wheel. I mean, this is really intense. And then I'm surrounded by all these cops with flashlights, guns, pointed in, hands on the wheel. And I'm pretty freaked out. It was like that for about 10 minutes when they finally said, get out of the car. And then they had me get in a police car and then check more things. And then they finally let me go. It was a sting operation that I wrecked. They were looking for some trafficker or something like that in a gray SUV with Colorado plates in that store. And that's after this photo. So when I see this photo, I think of many things.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, and there's a guy I could have called who's a federal agent that I could have called, but I just didn't even think of it. He's on a task force. I could have said, hey, Bob, what are your buddies doing here? Or at least use his name. I didn't even think of it. So that was that. But then a couple years later, when I did have my big exhibition in 2015, and so I had this photo hanging quite large. It was it was bigger. It was, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was 30 by 40 inches. And it was hanging near this, not the main door, but there was a back door that we used to go out. And this was Friday night when I'm setting it up, setting up. Now I had a lighting crew because we have, there's 38 tall pedestals with custom bikes on them and theater lighting. 2 theater lights on each. I had a lighting person that I'd have to supervise how I want the lights. I had 105 framed photos on the wall. And we have labels on everything. We're just doing the finishing touches. It's about after 1 a.m. I'd been shooting bikes in my studio that's there as well. And so my assistants are exhausted. We're heading out the back door and we're just about out. And I say, wait a minute. Stop. I got an idea. And they go, what the hell? It's time to go to bed. I go, no, there's one thing we got to do. I had a magnifying glass with me, and I knew there was some chain in the back, some little chain. And so I said, I got an idea. And there was a drill we found. We drilled a hole in it, put the chain through it, and we hung the magnifying glass under this photo.
Oh, nice.
And for the week that this was hanging, and especially at the party where there's 600 people, everybody came through and lifted that magnifying glass to find themselves and their friends in the photo.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
That is cool. I can imagine walking in there and just, even if I didn't know anybody there, just looking to see people having fun at the concert.
Yeah. Actually, this image has been since printed 20 feet wide and is hanging permanently from the ceiling of that gallery.
Oh, wow.
They sort of have it as a signature image.
20 feet? So like vinyl or something?
Yeah.
Or
I don't know what it was printed on, but it was done on panels, on 3 panels that are welded together, the 3 welded frames, and then those are bolted together. And
very cool.
You want to go one more decade or?
Oh, yeah, we can. Yeah.
I call this photo time travel because to me, it's suggestive of no particular time. I mean, it could be any time. And I love the light at the end of the tunnel and traveling through the tunnel. I use a gyroscope quite a bit. I've used it for probably 25 or more years, probably at least 25 years. And for this shoot, it's something called a motorcycle cannonball. And it was a coast-to-coast journey of antique bikes. And this was in 2014. And this wasn't quite 100 years old. I know the 2016 version of it that I also photographed was all 100-year-old bikes. This one was not quite as old, but this bike is a 2015. photograph from 2014. It's a 2015 Indian. The guy riding it is Japanese. His name is Nimi. He doesn't speak a word of English, not a lick. And so could you imagine traveling on a bike that's going to certainly break down many times? Now he's alternating days with the guy that owns the bike, another Japanese guy, a friend of his. I'll show you that in a moment. But so I just like this for the feeling of it. It does, I'm able to do, it's probably like a quarter, I don't know, an eighth of a second, tenth of a second, something like that, maybe a quarter second. Actually, it could be, yeah, probably a quarter second. And he's quite sharp, but of course, everything else is quite blurry. And the stabilization I get from the gyroscope helps me out on this. To do this, by the way, I am sitting backwards. And so these trips are about 3,800 miles, and I sit backwards on a motorcycle for every single mile. I've got more than, I've been saying 25,000 miles backwards. I've been saying that for years, so I'm probably over 30 by now because I've done it across the U.S. 5 times. I'm doing it again this coming September. I've done it in Japan, Italy, Nepal, Mexico, everywhere. Go to the photo before, which is the same trip, maybe a different year. I'm not sure. What year is that? 2012, so it's older. And it's the same bike from a different year. And this is the owner of the bike named Shinya Kimura, who is quite famous. I mean, his bikes, he builds them for Brad Pitt, for example, I think has a couple of them. And his bikes go to some very famous people. He is the Zen of motorcycles. He's so cool with his bikes. But this is an antique bike that he kept running. I happen to like this because it's very early in the morning. We're out and we're in the state of Washington, so we've already gone coast to coast. And every 2 years, the trip would happen and go on a different path. You know, different route every time. It's all 2-lane roads. And here we are early in the morning in Washington. And I just love the feeling of the light, even the, I don't know what you call it, the flare that you get, the prisms from the sun on the right side. Yeah. And to me, what makes this photo is the crane or whatever the bird is on the left there. It completes the photo. I feel like without it, it's just not a complete photo.
Yeah, I'm originally from Washington State, and this looks very like a familiar scene.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share and just go to this right here. So as we wrap up, one of the things I like to ask people is if they have any advice for up and coming photographers. Any advice you want to impart?
Wow. You know, the design school in Denver used to send up interns to work with me, which was fine. I always thought it was a little wrong that they waited till so late in their education, because I think that interning should be done, if not the first semester, the second semester, because too many of them would say they had no idea it was so much work, that it was so hard, that it was so involved, and they weren't getting a real sense of things. So I think interning is great. I think it should be done quick. Another thing, one intern came in once with a business plan, and we chatted, and it was the first day, and they said they'd really hope I could take some time and look at their business plan. I said, there's 2 options, I see. So I look at it, you have 2 choices. There's a garbage pail there, you could drop it in there, or you can go to your car and preserve it for the future for yourself. He chose the latter. But, you know, for me, it's been about saying yes. Just, I have not had very strong plans as to a career. There's someone like Rick Souders he interviewed. I thought his path was so much more clear. You know, he went to school for it at a fabulous school. Like, I'm jealous. I would have loved to have gone to Art Center. And I think schooling is wonderful. And then he went on to work as a studio manager. And then he got a job at Coors. And this path was very linear. And my path, I guess you could say it's linear because one thing followed the next, but it wasn't linear in the sense that it wasn't a very clear train track. It was more like a narrow gauge that had very steep way to go and sharp turns. But those turns were decided just by life as it appeared. You know, an opportunity would come up and they'd say, can you do it? And the answer was yes. I may have been up all night, hopefully just till 3 or 4 in the morning, trying to figure something out. But when a client walked into the studio, the place was spotless, the bagels were out, the coffee was made, the set was lit, ready to start, right?
Yeah.
But I just say, follow your passion, follow what feels right. And when those calls happen and people ask for opportunities, why not? Why
Yeah,
not see what it's about? So
yeah,
that's,
totally.
yeah.
Well, I think that's great advice. Thank you so much for sharing all the stories and your amazing work, and I really appreciate you making time to be on the show.
Sure. No
Um,
problem.
and so you have a show coming up, right?
I have an exhibit in the summer in August, so that'll be. I'm actually in a new gallery right now that
Okay.
it looks like a New York, LA gallery up in South Dakota, and
Okay.
it's gorgeous. So I'm doing that. I have my trip to Bhutan next week.
Mhm.
Then I've like a week or 10 days in Tennessee for a shoot, and then right after that, Portland, Oregon,
Mm.
uh, California, just whatever
Okay.
comes up. Like I got an email yesterday saying, "Hey, would you like to come to Denmark?" So it's like, hey,
Okay.
why not?
So, so if the viewers want to follow you on all these, you post on your Instagram and keep
I
up on your
do. I'm
website.
not so good at Instagram, and the website goes back only till 2014. And
Hmm.
I would love to work my way back, but I got to catch up. Even the last
Hmm.
year or two, I'm still behind. And someday, when there's more time and I'm retired, God
Hmm.
knows that'll never happen. I'll start working my way back, and maybe even start scanning old stuff.
Great. Well, thanks again. And to everybody watching, thanks for watching the show, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Jim, and best of luck with this new venture.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. It helps us connect with more photography lovers just like you.